Most people on Earth live in homes without basements. Not because they chose not to have them, not because basements went out of style, but because the ground beneath their houses never demanded one. Walk through a neighborhood in Manchester, Munich, Osaka, or Sydney. The foundations go down maybe 18 inches. The structure sits on the soil and stops there. Now, picture a construction site in Minneapolis in early spring. The excavator is already 4 feet underground, and the first concrete wall hasn't been poured yet. The builder is not digging a basement, not officially. He is digging a legally required footing. He has to go this deep, or the frost will destroy what he builds. But standing at the bottom of that pit, staring up at 4 feet of exposed earth, he is looking at a decision that almost makes itself. What looks like an American design preference is actually geology, building code, and economics colliding underground, and almost nobody knows it. Pull up a map of basement prevalence across the United States and set it beside a map of frost depth. The two images are nearly identical. In Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and New York, somewhere between 80 and 90% of single-family homes have basements. Move south past the frost line and the number collapses. In Florida, it's below 2%. In Texas, under 5%. In Louisiana, functionally 0%. That's not a preference gap, that's a geographic wall. The contrast becomes sharper when you look internationally. The United Kingdom has cold winters. England, Scotland, and Wales all have meaningful frost seasons. But basements in standard British residential construction are rare to the point of oddity, a feature associated with high-end urban retrofits, not ordinary housing. The frost line in southern England rarely exceeds 12 to 18 inches. Deep excavation was never mandated. The basement never appeared. Canada dismantles the cultural argument entirely. Canadian housing culture is rooted in British settlement traditions, the same as much of the American Northeast. But Canadian homes in Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and Manitoba have basements at rates comparable to the American Midwest. Because Canada has the same problem. The frost goes deep. The code demands you dig to meet it. The basement follows. If this were a cultural preference, if Americans simply liked the idea of bonus underground space, you would expect to find it everywhere in America. You don't. You find it precisely where the ground freezes hard enough to require deep foundation work. The geography is too clean for this to be coincidence. Here is what the frost actually does. Soil is not solid. It holds water in the gaps between particles. When winter temperatures drop below freezing and stay there, that water turns to ice. Ice expands, roughly 9% by volume. The soil expands with it. In northern states, this freezing front descends steadily through late fall and winter, pushing everything above it upward. The force involved is not subtle. Frost heave can exert several tons of pressure per square foot against anything sitting in its path. A concrete footing placed above the frost line doesn't gradually deteriorate. It gets destroyed quickly and systematically. The ground lifts it, then it thaws and drops it, then it lifts again. After a few winters, the foundation has cracked, tilted, or buckled badly enough to threaten the entire structure above it. Every cold climate building code in the United States responds to this by requiring that foundation footings extend below the local frost depth. In Chicago, that minimum is 42 inches. In Minneapolis, it's 42 to 48. In Portland, Maine, it can reach 60 inches, 5 feet underground, before a single wall goes up. Now here is the economic logic that changed everything. Excavating to 4 feet costs money. But the cost of excavation is not linear. The equipment is already on site. The labor is already paid. Digging from 4 feet to 8 feet, adding a full basement, increases foundation cost by roughly 30 to 40%. In exchange, you get an entirely new floor of enclosed, usable space. You're not paying for a basement. You're paying a modest premium on top of work you were legally required to do anyway. Contractors understood this quickly. If you're already 4 feet down, going to 8 feet is the cheapest floor you will ever build. The basement didn't get invented. It got discovered as a byproduct of a code requirement that had nothing to do with storage, recreation rooms, or square footage. Before there were basements in the modern sense, there were root cellars. Farming families across New England and the mid-Atlantic states dug them from the early colonial period onward. Not underneath framed houses initially, into hillsides, under barns, cut into the earth beside homesteads. The goal was thermal stability. Below the frost line, ground temperature stays between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That range is too cold for bacteria to thrive rapidly, too warm for food to freeze. Before mechanical refrigeration, that underground zone was the only reliable cold storage available. A family in Vermont in 1840 kept root vegetables, hard cheeses, salted meats, and preserved jars through 6 months of winter by packing them into a below-grade space. The underground wasn't mysterious or inconvenient to them. It was the pantry. By the time framed residential construction spread through northern cities after the Civil War, the behavioral habit was already established. Below the floor meant functional space. When coal furnaces began appearing in northern urban housing in the 1870s and the 1880s, the basement became the obvious location for them. Not because anyone planned it that way, but because it was the only logical answer to a specific problem. A coal furnace is heavy, fire-adjacent, and produces ash. It cannot sit in a living room or a bedroom. It cannot safely occupy an above-grade closet. It needs its own space, ideally one that's already insulated by earth, accessible to an exterior coal delivery chute, and separated from living areas by a floor and a door. The basement answered every constraint. By 1900, the standard northern urban home, a Chicago 2-flat, a Detroit Craftsman, a Cleveland row house, had a coal delivery chute cut into the foundation wall, an ash pit, and a boiler room. The basement was now the mechanical heart of the house, not a design preference, a survival system. The family that heated their home through a Chicago winter in 1935 didn't think of the basement as extra space. They thought of it as the room that kept them alive. Here is the twist the story requires. The American basement was not produced by one cause. It was not the frost line alone, or the root cellar tradition alone, or the coal furnace alone. What locked the basement into American construction as a near universal expectation was the collision of all three independent forces, developed in different centuries for different reasons, that converged on the same architectural answer at the same moment in history. The frost line building code demanded deep excavation. That was pure engineering, driven by regulatory mandate. The root cellar tradition had already trained generations of Americans to treat below-grade space as functional rather than wasted. That was cultural habit, developed from agricultural necessity. The coal furnace created an industrial infrastructure that physically required a dedicated underground room. That was technology, driven by the heating industry. None of these forces was designed to produce a basement. None of them referenced the others. But they arrived together in Northern American construction between roughly 1870 and 1920, and the result was a feature so reinforced by overlapping necessity that it became invisible as a choice. Model building codes, which eventually consolidated into the International Residential Code, first published in 1998 by the International Code Council, formalized frost depth requirements as a national standard. Every permitted cold climate residential build now had the excavation mandate written into the approval process. Builders who might have questioned whether a basement was necessary found that the code had already answered the question for them. They were digging anyway. Then the real estate market did what markets do. Homes with basements began appraising higher than homes without them. Real estate listings in cold climate markets started treating basements as a standard feature, the same way they treated bedrooms and bathrooms. Once the basement appeared in the appraisal model, builders had a financial incentive to keep including it even when the engineering argument had weakened. The byproduct had become a selling point. The accident had become an expectation. The regions where basements never appeared aren't engineering failures. They're geology giving a different answer to the same question. Florida's problem is the water table. In Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties, groundwater sits between 1 and 4 feet below the surface in many areas, sometimes less after heavy rain. Pour a concrete foundation below grade and it fills with water. Builders in South Florida understood this before the 20th century was a decade old. The solution wasn't to fight the water table, it was to build on top of it, on slab foundations elevated slightly above grade. Basements were never a viable option. They weren't rejected, they were impossible. Texas presents a different problem: expansive clay. The Beaumont Clay Formation underlying Houston and much of East Texas is among the most reactive soils in North America. It swells dramatically when wet and contracts when dry. The lateral pressure it exerts against a below-grade concrete wall is sufficient to crack and bow the structure over a period of years. The Texas Department of Insurance has documented slab on grade as the dominant residential foundation type in the state, specifically because of this soil behavior. Basement construction in Houston is not common practice. It is, in many conditions, an engineering liability. California's answer came from seismic activity. After the 1971 Sylmar earthquake, and definitively after the 1994 Northridge earthquake, California's residential building codes moved strongly against deep below-grade residential structures in seismic zones. The soil liquefaction and lateral movement that make earthquakes destructive are significantly more dangerous to structures with deep foundations. The Midwest is where the story gets one more complication. In tornado-prone states, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Iowa, basements persist not only because of frost depth requirements, but because they function as tornado shelters. The basement in a Kansas farmhouse is not just a heating legacy. It is life safety infrastructure. The frost line gave the Midwest its basement. The tornado gave it a second reason to keep it. The engineering solution to the frost line problem was developed in Scandinavia, where builders faced the same frozen ground challenge without always wanting to commit to full basement excavation. The answer was called the Frost Protected Shallow Foundation, or FPSF. The concept is straightforward. If you insulate the perimeter of a foundation horizontally, extending rigid foam panels outward from the base of the wall into the surrounding soil, you prevent the ground beneath and beside the structure from freezing in the first place. The frost depth requirement exists because uninsulated soil freezes. Insulated soil doesn't freeze the same way. Eliminate the frost, and you eliminate the mandate for deep excavation. The United States adopted FPSF into the International Residential Code in the 1990s, codified under Section R403.3. A properly designed frost-protected shallow foundation in a cold climate like Minnesota or Maine can sit as little as 12 to 16 inches below grade. Not 4 feet, not 8, 12 to 16 inches. The constraint that produced a century of American basements had been engineered away. Simultaneously, the equipment that lived in basements was shrinking out of them. Tankless water heaters, standard in much of Europe and Japan for decades, entered the American mainstream in the 2000s and 2010. They mount on a wall. They fit in a closet. High-efficiency condensing furnaces, which became available in the 1980s and are now code required in many jurisdictions, are compact enough to occupy a utility closet next to the laundry. PEX plumbing manifolds replaced the sprawling basement-mounted copper distribution systems that once required a full mechanical room to service. The basement no longer has a mechanical reason to exist. The frost line no longer demands the excavation that created it. And yet, here is the second reversal. The basement is not disappearing quickly. National Association of Home Builders. Data shows basement starts in new single-family construction, declining across cold climate states through the 2010s and into the 2020s, replaced increasingly by slab-on-grade and crawlspace foundations, even in regions where basements had been near universal for 100 years. But the transition is slower than the engineering would suggest. Builders in Minnesota and Michigan are discovering resistance from buyers who have internalized the basement as a non-negotiable feature. Appraisers in those markets still factor basement square footage into valuations. Buyers still list it in search filters. The engineering problem was solved. The market habit wasn't. A feature produced by a regulatory mandate that no longer exists is now being sustained by a real estate expectation that doesn't know the mandate is gone. Go back to that construction site in Minneapolis. The excavator is at the bottom of the pit, 4 feet down. The frost line here runs to 44 inches, so this depth is legally required. The footing has to be here or the building code won't sign off, but the crew is going to 8 feet. Not because the code requires it, because buyers expect it, because the realtor listed unfinished basement in the projected specs, and that line affects the sale price. Because this is how houses in this market have been built for 100 years, and nobody in the transaction, not the builder, not the buyer, not the appraiser, has any immediate incentive to question why. Underneath that expectation is a layered history that nobody involved is thinking about. The frost heave science that drove the original code, the root cellar habit that preceded it, the coal furnaces that reinforced it, the international residential code that formalized it, the appraisal model that monetized it, and underneath all of that, just the simple, indifferent fact of how deeply the ground in this part of North America freezes in January. It is geology expressing itself through building code, and building code producing bonus square footage as an unintended side effect. In Florida, the water table expressed itself and nothing was built below grade. In Texas, the Beaumont clay expressed itself and the same result followed. In California, seismic risk expressed itself and codes responded accordingly. In Minnesota, frozen ground expressed itself, and a contractor in 1895 realized he was already halfway to a free floor and kept digging. Every country builds the foundations its ground demands. Americans in cold climates happen to live over soil that demanded deep excavation, happen to have inherited a root cellar instinct, happen to be heating their homes with coal at precisely the moment building conventions were being standardized, and happen to produce a real estate market that turned a byproduct into a benchmark. The basement was never designed, it was discovered, and now that we've engineered away the problem that created it, we're quietly undiscovering it, one slab-on-grade foundation at a time.